Hey folks, Steve here with another Dark Valley video. It's been some time since I could record. I've been kind of sick for the last couple of weeks, mostly a cold in my throat, and so my speech has been a little limited or made more difficult and would not have made for a very good listening experience for these videos, and so I've held off on recording until now, though I still got it a little bit. It's about to go away, I think. I'm about to be recovered, so should be able to record some more stuff. And taking a look at the setup that I had done from the last video, in the setup video, Ted Racer had reached out and had made some suggestions in terms of where units should be going. And I've done what I can to accommodate that, though it makes me ponder some things as we look to get started in the game. So the one change he had suggested was to get the artillery down here in Sevastopol, to attack Sevastopol, rather than Leningrad, which, excuse me, I've done. So I've moved it down there instead. Basically, he's saying, that the Axis should focus on cutting the lake supply of Leningrad and have that be that, and let the game proceed from there, where this artillery could be better used down against Sevastopol. But that also meant that this artillery also needs air support, I believe, and so I had to adjust the positioning of our air unit so it could be within 12 range to use that artillery. So a couple of slight adjustments. This air unit's still in range to support over here for a while, so if we can collapse Sevastopol, then we can move the plane back up this way like we originally had it. I still need to place or modify the positioning of the supply depot markers and the HQs. They're just sort of there in a middle positioning until I can figure out exactly where I want them to be. So don't focus too much on those guys yet. The other thing that Ted had mentioned was he doesn't like to double up the... let me get the glare off the screen for a moment here. He does not like to have these 1-4 rifle divisions set up stacked. He doesn't think that that's as valuable, and what the 1-4 should be doing is being used to set up secondary lines. And he had mentioned, and I knew this, but if he thinks now's the time to set up for it, it might as well, to set up units behind the Volga, because Axis units can move across the Volga, but they cannot attack across the Volga, which means that if I were to get every single hex on the Soviet, east side of the river with a 1-4 unit, the cheapest units and weakest units that I have, the Axis could actually never ever cross the river. I'd have to do some kind of air bombardment to remove a unit and then move it across the river, which, that just involves more effort than I would otherwise need to take. So I guess it's making sense to try to create this line across the river. The only thing is, every unit that I'm taking off the front line to put back here makes the line that much weaker across the board, and so I'm cautious to take any more off, and we still have a few hexes here and then up here that aren't covered by units, but I'm not sure the Axis will be all the way over there to cross the river in one turn, and I'll use the replacements for the Soviets at the end of this first turn of the scenario to chuck a couple more 1-4s over there, and they'll just spread across the line, and then we'll have covered the entire river. I really can't see where I can afford to pull units off the front line to create even a secondary line, back this way, because at this point, if I pull any units off the stacks, they're just going to get crushed by the Axis anyway, and at least with the way I've tried to set up the front line, the Axis only has so many units to place themselves, And the greater chance I can create a BL1 result for the Axis when they attack, the better off the Soviets are, because the Axis are going to take those hits harder than the Soviets will. So if they, if a 4 combat power, or maybe 5 or 6 combat power stack of Germans try to attack even a 2 stack of 2-1-4 units, if you look at the combat odds, there's still like a 50% chance that the Axis are going to take a step loss, and who cares if we lose a 1-4, but the Axis simply can't recover as easily. So it's like if I mess around with trying to create secondary lines, to me that seems like wasted effort, because it's going to make it easier for the Axis to bust through the first line, taking no losses, and then, excuse me, then they're just going to roll up to that secondary weaker line and bust up through that. So I feel like just knowing that each side has relatively limited power kind of on both sides of that front line. I mean, there's not, a huge amount of combat power in any given hex that, the Soviets want to make the Germans bleed for every hex they take. So along this front line, I mean, anywhere they want to try to attack, they're going to have a decent chance of getting a black eye for it. And I think that makes more sense than just, creating a weak front line that's going to get demolished. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to create that Volga line, but I don't see how it makes sense to do any additional lines than what I've created here. We've had to set up some units down this way by scenario requirement, and I've tried to set up some units to support airborne operations, so the airborne units are over here, and I've got a few extra units in the cities around Moscow just to make sure that the Axis doesn't get real squirrely and try to get Moscow at the moment, though I think there's decent defense there for the Soviets. So I don't know, I made some adjustments based on Ted's suggestions, but in a lot of ways I think this is as spread thin as the Soviets can manage, because they need to have the Axis be ground down over time. The Axis just does not have reinforcement capability the same way that the Soviets do, so they just need to make the Axis bloody their knuckles, and over time the Soviets are going to be able to start overrunning them, which it will only be so many turns in this game that summer of 43 is going to be that critical point where the game shifts towards the Soviets being the attacker and the Axis being the defender, and the Soviets are trying to get to Berlin in time for the game scenario. So we're still pretty far away from that. This is going to be turn 12 out of the total turn 44, and I think for this one, what we'll do is we'll play through, we'll play the 6 or whatever turns it is. Let me double check that. Yeah, Fall Blau, the scenario in the scenario book is 6 turns long. I think we can look at playing through 6 turns, and we can assess where we're at like we did with Barbarossa. If things have gotten clearly out of whack, we can do like what we did before and clear the board, set up Citadel or something, or we can just keep progressing and go from here through the rest of the full campaign. I think we're past the weirdness of, if you screw up Barbarossa, where are you going to be at, to something that's a little more manageable for just starting up the game. So I'm going to put a break here, and when I'm back, we'll start turn 12. Okay, this is the look ahead for the Action Cup. So a couple of things as it relates to this scenario. The Axis has the option to start Case Blue, Fall Blau either this turn or next turn. And the difference between whether to do it this turn or next turn is that whichever turn the Axis chooses to do it, they actually get to pick the first 2 chits as initiative chits, rather than just one as the initiative player. So, for instance, this turn, the Axis could choose to not execute it, pick the first chit, and maybe have it be a combat, and then everything else is random. Or we could have the first 2 and say maybe do combat and then move, and then the rest is random or mix in some Panzer chits or whatever. So I've got to decide what I want to do about that. I'm not sure exactly what I want to do yet. But to talk in terms of the chit availability, so we have our logistics chit as usual. The Axis get a 2 move or combats here. So you can see both of these have reverse sides on them, which means when they're drawn, the Axis player can decide which to use in that given situation. So if we pulled it and it turned out that combat is what we want, we could do that, or if we found movement more useful, we could do that, as opposed to these single-use chits where that's just what you get to do. So there's some flexibility there, though, you basically want 1 move and 1 combat anyway, so it's just going to be, when do you want to do one versus the other. We got to pick 2 Panzer chits, any 2 Panzer HQs. I picked the first and the second here because those are the HQs that are down in the southern sector. So the first is down in the actual area of eastern Ukraine, and the other is up there towards, what city is that? Voronezh. So I think it makes sense to activate those guys again, since they'll be in the flat terrain. They can potentially do some encirclements. We actually also have the Manstein chit, which we don't have to use. It's an optional thing. It's like I should put it in the assets box, I think. But basically, we'll have the opportunity to use it if we want, but we can only use this chit so many times in a given year. So that's sort of an optional thing we can look to use. For the Soviets, they actually are kind of constrained. So they have their Stavka chit, right, which is used, again, as a reminder, to pull units out of the Stavka reserve, and we do have a number of units in the Stavka reserve. This chit would allow them to come onto the board as reinforcements, and then if they're in range of the Stavka HQ, they can take some movement and combat actions. So it's useful, but it's not as good as like a full combat chit or something, right? It has somewhat limited uses, but we can choose to use this at any time, as long as the next chit hasn't been pulled yet, so we can interrupt and try to make a counter punch. Then the Soviets have a move chit, and it is only a move chit, so they get 1 real movement for their forces this turn, and we'll see how useful that is. And then we get the Combat Zhukov chit, which is the first chit like this that we've had on camera. And basically what this chit allows units to do is, if they're in range of the Zhukov HQ, they can conduct combat, basically. Now, all the other Soviet units on the board can conduct combat if they want, but they're treated as out of supply, which means they have a -2 to their die roll, which in my opinion kind of means it's not going to be worth it to attack at all, really, unless we can spot a couple of no-brainer areas to beat up on some weakened Axis stacks. So truly, in the summer months here, it seems the Soviets are a bit more constrained. They've got some potential to do some stuff, but it looks like, just in the way that these chits are going to function, the Soviets are going to have most of their momentum in the area that we would say is Army Group Center's area of concern, so the areas around Moscow. That's where the Soviets are going to be able to maybe put a hurting on the Axis Army Group Center there. So that's the setup here, and then we just need to decide, basically, I'm going to put that in the asset box, and put Stavka back in the Soviet assets box. We basically just need to decide, as the Axis, do we do Case Blue now, or do we do it later? And I will need to think on that. So when we're back, I will have decided that, and we will have started that process. We start the scenario in the action phase, so we've already technically have done reinforcements and strategic movement and all of that, so we're going to just head right into the action here once I've made that determination and have begun taking the activity steps. So see you in a second. Okay, so I think I've decided that I will launch Fall Blau in July. If I'm interpreting the Fall Blau special rules correctly, it's either do Fall Blau as a special action type of thing this turn or next turn, and on that turn you pick the first 2 initiative chits. I don't read it as, though you could read it this way, I guess. I don't read it as you either decide to do it now or you don't get the benefit at all. And I think that way because historically Case Blue didn't start until like late June, which would really technically be the July turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the June turn, this turn, turn 12, be a regular turn, and then we'll do Fall Blau next turn. And the reason why I say that is that if I look over here, what my intention is to I'm gonna do a combat round as the Axis as our initiative chit. The Axis does have initiative this turn. I'm gonna do combat and try to blast some holes open. And then, assuming the rest of the chits go okay, I would expect to be able to move, or via Panzer activations, move to exploit the holes in the line that I've created and get us into a better position so that at the beginning of next turn we can do like a combat and a move, and maybe there, knock loose whatever defense is formed over here, and then we're, running down to the Caucasus and we're headed towards Stalingrad. That's my thought process there, and it sort of helps just because the timing of the historical Case Blue I think matches out this way. So I got the rest of the chits then in the cup, and again the Axis can rely on the Manstein chit, and the Soviets can rely on the Stavka chit. Though where I positioned the Zhukov and Stavka HQs, which are both at the moment up here, means that, and maybe I should have thought of that, I should have maybe placed the Zhukov HQ in the south. I didn't, and it's too late now. But basically the Axis should be able to do a lot of damage down in the southern sector, and maybe we can see what else can be done up towards Leningrad. And everywhere else just needs to kind of hold, I guess, as the Axis for now. So the other thing I still need to do is I need to do my final placement for the supply depots and HQ units, just because I wanted to get the units all set up before I did that. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to conduct my combats. When we come back, we'll show the aftermath of that first chit, and we'll look towards pulling the next chit. Okay, before I actually get into things, I need to take a quick segue, because I have a challenge that I need assistance on when it comes to tweezers. See, I have a pair of tweezers that I use for whiff, and they're pretty good. And then I have these extra tweezers that I have, or forceps, whatever you want to call them, for gaming at home. And I ordered a set off of Amazon, but they sent me the wrong ones, and I didn't care enough to get a correction. And it's these guys. Now, they're short. They're not very big. But they work. They have a wide resting width, and I can pick up, a variety of counters and do whatever I need with them. But then, at Home Depot, I bought the actual ones that I intended to originally buy, which are similar, but they are much longer, and can be used with a little more precision. So I got these guys, right? And I got two at the same time. I bought two so that I could, a buddy and me could both use pretty good tweezers when we're playing a game. The problem I have is that the resting width of the tines are different. So this one has a nice wide resting width, which means I can pick up different size counters pretty good, all is well in the world. This guy is narrower. I think it has to do with, how the metal is bent on these corners right here. And I would like to widen this, but I don't have any idea how to do it without destroying the dang thing. Now, this one's fine because it can pick up
Dark Valley counters just fine and dandy, but I couldn't pick up a lot of other counters because they're just not wide enough. So if anyone happens to know how to widen these things, I don't know, superheat the corners here and try to stretch it, I don't know. Let me know, please. Because one's great, one's going to work fine, one isn't, and I'd like to fix that. So if you happen to know, leave a comment. I would love to know an answer to this, how I can widen this thing permanently. So, all right, we'll be back. Okay, so first combat chit for turn 12 as the Axis did not go as well as I really would have liked it to have gone. I had an attack lined up right down here, and all I did is ping off one of the rifle divisions, and I could not advance across the critical rail line. That would be my main forward momentum pusher. I managed to get a little bit of an advancement here and knock some units back, so that provides the opportunity to encircle this little stack here, but I would have wanted a larger pocket, honestly. The problem with this bulge here is I couldn't really do anything there, and a couple of places along the line through here I got some BL-1s, which is not what the Axis want, that's what the Soviets want. Up north, I couldn't do a whole lot, but if you can see there, I did actually take that hex providing lake supply to keep Leningrad from being isolated. So, while we're going to hold that with just with the skin of our teeth, we have created a problem for the Soviets here. So, they are not going to be able to get supply to Leningrad, and that could see the collapse of Leningrad because of that. But I'm hoping that the Axis can get their movement chit here so that they can properly realign the proper defense to pinch off Leningrad, and it would be nice to get some movement down here where I've made some exploits and run some of these armor units up and around to try to again, isolate some units. I just don't know what I'm going to have feasible here. Oh, and I did, down below here, now it isn't clear to me if artillery advance after combat with the stack. I assume that they did. I don't know if they do. But I did do the bombardment, which used up the air unit here nearby. But we were able to eliminate the fort defenses, so we got a fort destroyed marker here in the first hex towards Sevastopol, and we managed to take it. So that went well, and we're basically going to be looking at what we're probably going to need to do is take this hex as well, just so we can get as many combat factors forward as possible to then hit Sevastopol. Only problem is I'm not going to be able to do the superpowered artillery strike now because I've already used it with the air, and it might be more valuable to do that for the Sevastopol attack. But you know, we can worry about that next turn, I guess. So you know, maybe I can use the Manstein chit, you know, get another attack over here, wipe this out, and then next turn in July we'll be set up to take Sevastopol. So that's going to be the plan, I think. I tried to attack across the straits. I managed to ping off one of the 1-4s there, but I think I took a step loss somewhere. Yeah, I took a step loss for it. It was a BL-1. So we're working our way across that strait, but it's going to be slow going. So overall, we made some advancements here with that combat chit, but nothing quite as exciting as I would have liked. I really would have wanted to bust that open so that we could turn, you know, that advancement and this advancement into a pocketing of this whole little sector down here. But we're not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to pull the next chit from the cup, and we're going to see what we get. Could be anything. Now is also a choice for the Axis to decide if they want to do Manstein right now. I don't think there is a burning need to do it. I have to use Manstein according to scenario rules. Whoops, down here. So it's just kind of whenever I want to do that. If I want to do it this turn, And excuse me, sorry. That Stavka chit for the Soviets, it's really like, is anything that they could do right now going to impact the Leningrad situation or the situation down south? Not really. So we want to wait and see what happens. So go into the chit cup. We now pull. Okay, well, it's the Axis mover combat, and I believe we can't just have another combat round. I think this has to be a movement. So we're going to set the movement down, and what I suspect I'm going to do is exploit the holes in the line and properly secure the chokehold around Leningrad. So it should be a pretty straightforward series of movements. But I'm gonna take myself off camera. I'm gonna take care of that movement. I'm gonna double check the rules to make sure I can't do another combat. I'm pretty sure I can't. It has to be like you get one movement in combat per turn. So we'll be back in a second. Okay, so my movements have been basic. I just shuffled some units down here. I'm taking a gamble. So I surged forward a little bit to help lock in this isolation, and then I realized that because I had a unit sitting on this rail junction, that they can't trace supply through this rail line right here because it stops, it leads to an Axis unit, so that rail line doesn't reach the eastern part of the map. And then looking here, this rail line would, but I sent one of my panzers up with as much movement speed as I could, or movement points that I could, to project the Zoc on this rail line. And I'm trying to understand the supply rules and how to understand the line of supply, because some of these units, if they're on the rail line, but the rail line is interrupted by a Zoc, it can't get to the eastern part of the map, is what I'm thinking. But the verbiage of the supply rules makes me uncertain. But the goal here is that there's the units furthest deep in this pocket over here, or this forming salient. If that's true, would have to count up here to this rail line to count supply. And some of these guys down here can't get there in 5 hexes and will be marked out of supply. So I'm trading that unit being out of supply for a bunch of these guys being out of supply, which would potentially enable us to knock them loose, I guess, in the next combat that we can get a hold of. And oh yeah, I forgot to move ye old HQ, but that was also intended there. So that's all we got there. And then up here, I just shuffled some units around, and I basically there is a Zoc here, so I had limited ability to move up and around, but I have secured the situation as much as I possibly can. So here's hoping that Leningrad becomes isolated when logistics comes up, and then that'll go poof, doing better than history. So we're going to go to the cup, and we're going to see what we get here. Stavka, I don't see a use for yet. Manstein, I don't know. We could, to take another hex near Sevastopol, but let's just wait and see what happens here. Okay. Next chit is 2nd Panzer activation. So that would be up here. So this is good. We can do some combat and move, and potentially actually get some forces nearby for that panzer unit we sent out far ahead to survive. So we're going to get some activations right over here. I'm going to take us off camera, and we'll see how that goes. With this activation, it's been a while. I got to double check my action here so we can do combat and move, which is what I think we'd want to do in this case, to bust open a couple of holes and feed some units around and hopefully cause a nice big pocket to occur, and then that will allow us to continue surging forward towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus. So I'll be right back when the 2nd Panzer activation is complete. Well, within the sphere of the 2nd Panzer HQ, we actually have seen some interesting developments. So we busted some holes in a couple of places, and the post-combat movement wasn't as dramatic as I maybe would have wanted to, just because we don't have a preponderance of force to leave big gaps in the line. But what we have done is we've created a very difficult situation for the Soviets. You know, there was a retreat, so one of these 1-4s came back here and is sort of blocking some stuff, and in fact this unit managed to get on the rail line, but other combats allowed us to come through here. These units are still not isolated because there's a little gap here that they can get a lock through, not a line of supply, but it is a line of communication. And so what I really need to have happen is, before the Soviet movement or any others, it would be great if the Axis could get their 1st Panzer activation shit, in which case then I will certainly close up the pockets that we have here, and this will be a pretty dramatic shift on the Soviets, and will make the Case Blue Fall Blau launch in July pretty intense and powerful. So let's hope we see it happen here. But I'm going to go to the cup now to see what else happens. Again, I do not see where the Stavka Chit could help a whole lot right this second, other than to plop some units down, and they could attack, you know, again against Army Group Center and see what they can do, but I want to wait and see what happens here. So we're going to go back to the Chit. The odds are against the Axis getting this Panzer Chit, because really right now it's the Panzer Chit logistics and the Soviet activation markers, but we'll see what we get here. And alrighty, 25% chance, and we got it. Not a good day. Not a good day for the Soviets. Not one bit. So, we are going to, as I expertly moved my HQ unit to the right place, we are going to have our units within the activation range close up these big, nasty pockets and just really blow a nice big hole open in the Soviet line. So I'm going to take care of that activation. Should be pretty straightforward, and then we'll come back. Okay, with much debate, I made the following moves, and I did no combat, because all the combats that would take place would be needlessly bloody. And so what I did is I moved the unit up here, so now there's a clear, stable line of supply to that column of German units that are sticking all the way out there, projecting Zocs. I moved the unit up here, so he's still in range, and can potentially, you know, he might be in a little bit of danger there. But basically I'm projecting enough Zocs that they're going to be isolated, they're all going to be isolated. Some of these guys may end up isolated here. And really it's just a nice, it's a nice situation. If we can get the logistics Chit to come out right now, this would be just the super lucky Axis turn. I don't know that we'll get it, but gosh, if we did, that would be really beautiful. So, amazing. So this is I will say I'm surprised I've pulled the Chits that I have in the order that I have. This has been a very good opening turn for the Axis right now. Hard to get better than this. So there you go. Now here's what could happen. If we draw the combat Chit, Soviets aren't going to get much help there. If we use Stavka, that's not going to help the Soviets here. If we draw the Soviet movement Chit, what is that going to do for us? Well, if we pull the Soviet movement Chit, what we could do is try to pull some of these guys out of here. The problem is the Zocs are going to lock them up, and they're not going to be able to get through. They could do an emergency withdrawal, but the problem with that is you can only really do an emergency withdrawal if you move 2 hexes and you're free of an enemy Zoc. And I just don't know how many of these units could escape given my Zoc placement right now with these units. So
this is just really bad. And so I'm not going to use the Stavka chit. I don't see enough use in it other than to maybe plunk some units in Stalingrad, but we're going to do that with the next turn reinforcements of the Soviets anyway. So, basically what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to let the Soviet combat chits come up, the combat Zhukov chit, and then we're going to do the Stavka chit, and we're just going to try to hammer as the Soviets Army Group Center. That's going to be our goal. But the situation in the south right now is looking mighty fine for the Axis. So looking at what's left here, I'm going to do this on camera so you guys don't think I'm cheating here, because this is like, I just can't believe I'm drawing what I'm drawing. So if I draw logistics right now, you know what's up. Okay? If I draw logistics, and I have no idea if I will, but if I will, this will be very, very funny. My face is behind the camera, so I can't see what I'm playing around with here. Alright, this is what I'm pulling. Okay, it's not logistics, it is the combat Zhukov. So, the Soviets need to decide what they want to do with this. Here's the thing, any attacks they conduct, besides those in range of the Zhukov HQ, are going to be -2, which, gosh, even on the 6-to-1 table, that's pretty bad for the Soviets, because they're using combat results table B. That's going to very likely be, pretty bloody. And they're not even going to get 6-to-1 odds most of the time. We're really going to be talking, at best, 2-to-1, maybe 1-to-1. And when you got a -2, it's either no effect or attacker losses. So the Soviets really don't have a lot of options with this. So I'm going to take us off camera. I'm going to figure out what we want to do with this. And I'm going to take the actions, and we will come back. Okay, well, the Zhukov offensive here was kind of lackluster. Though we did cause a retreat for a German corps who moved back. And so one Guard corps sort of moved forward to kind of set up some future attacks. I had some close ones, but I didn't roll great. And to be honest, the combat results table for the Soviets, I mean, it's just not good. It's very difficult. You really need high odds to get anything resembling a decent result. And so, there were some opportunities there, but just not a whole lot happened. So, I think in this given turn so far, we've probably seen like a dozen or more Soviet rifle divisions eliminated and one German division eliminated so far, just as attrited in terms of losses. So this turn's going very well for the Germans, I have to say. Now might be a good time to be thinking about Stavka, and I say that because logistics hasn't come up yet. The only other action that's going to come up for the Soviets is their move. So if we do a Stavka activation, we pull some of the units out of the Stavka box, and we have them surge forward and hammer on some of these units in this little area around here, we could actually cause some problems. Then, if we drew the Soviet movement chit, we could then move through the break in the line, potentially, and then when logistics comes up, we could have caught some Germans isolated or out of supply or in some situation like that. So I think I need to sit down, figure out if Stavka makes sense, and execute that now. So we'll see. I'll be right back. Okay, so I used the Stavka chit for better or for worse here, and it did not go as well as I was hoping. Basically, I got 6 steps to take out of the Stavka reserve, which left me with 1 to leave behind, which was fine. That's all I really wanted to take out anyway. Problem was that, so I have a stacking problem in a lot of my cities because I have some of the armies that I put in as reserves. And I probably shouldn't have put them there because we need to be able to pull these units in. But you can actually put units on the Stavka HQ itself if it's in supply, and it is. And so I ended up putting 1 cavalry unit down here in the lower right here in Voronezh just as backup for the forthcoming Axis onslaught. And then I put an assault army in several tank divisions, I guess they're tank corps, and sent them out of the HQ up here, right here, and the goal was to put a big crack in, an additional crack just north of that guard infantry right there. So we'd have a really strong hole
punched through the line there. But I ended up not rolling very well, and because the Axis had support markers to boost the defense, it basically was a no result. So it's good to have the units there. They're strong units, and they're going to keep pushing in that area, and ultimately these units in Army Group Center are going to have to pull back and realign given the current situation, but not as good as the Soviets would have wanted. So that's as good as we can get, unfortunately, for the moment. Excuse me. So right now, I need to decide how I want to proceed. Now might be a good time to throw in the Manstein chit and just try to knock out this guy down here, right here, and this is a control marker. I guess I don't need that. It's really one unit doubled to 2, and I can attack with plenty of units. So I think what I need to do is just go ahead and do that. I'm gonna play the Manstein chit. This is so that when we have combat at the beginning of next turn, it can just be focused on Sevastopol. So for the first time in 1942, place it in the space 2 turns later on the record track. Okay, so we're going to get the Manstein chit back on turn 14. And basically, I'm just going to designate down here as to where he's going to go. I'm not going to put the chit there. And we get to activate units within 3 hexes as if they were a Panzer HQ. So I'm just activating this whole little cluster over here, and we're going to do an attack here. I'm just going to do it I'm going to do it on camera, sort of, since we're here. So double to 2, no other defensive terrain. The Soviets are running low on support markers. And I guess they'll use one here to boost that up to a 3. But then in turn here, we're going to have, not counting this artillery, 6, 12, 16 to 3. So that's 5 to 1 odds. I rolled a 2. So that's not terribly great. DR result, and a DR result can be ignored in a fort. So that fort being there is really helping this unit. So basically, that's all we can do, unfortunately. It's a real bummer. So Manstein was used, but to not good enough effect, which leads us back to the draw cup. There's only 2 chits left. Soviet move and logistics. Logistics is kind of what we want right now as the Axis, but that movement is still possible. So, we'll need to decide what we want to do here. So pulling the next chit out of the 2, and we get the Soviet movement. So this is going to be a critical time, because really what the Soviets would like to do is get situated, maybe try to move some units through the hole, and then down here try to salvage the situation, which they ought to be able to do, but it's going to require pulling back in some places. So this is going to take a little while to deal with. I'll come back from that move. I'm just going to pull the logistics chit out since it was the last chit, and basically we'll do the move, and then I'll come back and I'll show the results of the logistics chit, and then we'll run through the rest of the turn order, which will be mostly the attrition phase basically at this juncture. And that'll be it for this video. So I will be right back. Okay, lots to talk about here. So the Soviet movement, some of these units down here merely pulled back, basically trying to figure out a way to keep them in supply and help protect the southeast over here. But for sure, when it came to supply checking, these guys couldn't get away. They are marked as isolated. So that is excellent, excellent news for the Axis. And lesser good news, some of these units that were along here had to perform an emergency withdrawal, but they were able to get away from Axis units now.
I haven't really used emergency withdrawal too much in the past, but this was a given situation where it really made sense for the Soviets to do so. So basically, they were able to move 2 hexes regardless of terrain, and as long as they could get away and not be adjacent to an Axis unit, they could move. So even though there were Zocs there, it was basically, hey, an emergency pullout. So the Soviets managed to save some units there, and now you can sort of see there's an attempt to form a new line if possible, but of course, Case Blue is going to be launched next turn, and those guys are going to have a hard time staying anchored. Up in the north, the supply depot got pushed back by the units, and then with the Soviet move, they basically shuffled units through because there were an absence of Zocs in that area due to some flipped panzers. So right now, the Soviets are creating a pocket, but they can't quite do it. But they're very strong units in that little like J shape right here. Very strong units, so they should be able to kick some German teeth in at the next opportunity. Now those units during supply check could get, up through and around to get supply, so they're not out of supply, but their situation was looking more dire as we go. Some of the other Soviet units just sort of moved up to close the gap along the northern line here, and then we do have Leningrad as isolated. So, yeah, so overall, I mean, I think it was a pretty good turn for the Axis. The problem is, we've got that Army Group Center problem. That's going to have to get rectified in a really big way. They need to do something about that because that's going to be trouble, big trouble, if they can't fix that situation. So, it's sort of a balancing act, right? We're going to see the Soviets pushing down through here while the Axis continues up this way and down. We'll see where we're at. We could simply run out of units to hold a consistent line. Getting into Stalingrad is going to be tough, and once we take Stalingrad, assuming we do as the Axis, we're going to have a hard time holding it. But then it'll be all about the mad dash to get down here and get the right units off the board to win the game. So still a lot of work to do there for sure. We got to work on it. Okay, so now that the action phase is officially over, we're going to do the attrition phase. So we're going to do Axis Depot advancement, which honestly, there's not much for them to do. If we look here, we'll roll and see. We're in fair weather. Roll the force. They get 6 spaces. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we would put it here, I guess. Then up here, we'll roll. He can advance potentially, so we can move 6. We're going to do, let's see, where are the rail lines really at here? Okay. Be 1, 2, 3, and that's as far as we can go. Still not bad, I guess. And then, pretty much everywhere else, the depots can't go anywhere, so that's fine. The Axis doesn't need to worry about providing any air supply. So now we just have the attrition segment. Now, I've got to be careful here because I'm not sure every unit that is isolated is simply going to go poof here. So if the unit remains isolated and is adjacent to an in-supply enemy unit, you eliminate that unit. If the isolated unit is now in supply or out of supply, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so firstly, we're going to have Leningrad cleared. So, this is done. Making a mess. These units are eliminated. They're going to go in the dead pile. Whoops. Our victory points are going to change, so we're going to get a victory point here. Also have some other lost units in the dead pile. And that is all she wrote here. So I will get to commemorate the Leningrad capture. We'll mark it with a blue victory point marker. So we're now up to 32 victory points. We started at 31, I believe. We're now at 32. And then if we look down here, I'll zoom out. We'll get down to this area down here. I'll use the tweezers to help here. So this isolation marker can be moved. These guys are dead. These guys are adjacent. So these guys are dead. Adjacent. So these guys are dead. Lost armies here. Adjacent. Dead. Yeah, this pretty much all these guys are going to be dead. Yeah. Yipper. Okay, well, boys and girls, just had a issue with my memory card. I hope everything's captured here. So yeah, this is after the attrition segment, the Axis has cleared a whole big chunk of the line there, and they're basically going to be getting ready for Case Blue. Now, what sucks is that we don't have an easy opportunity to like get up through here and make use of this. What we're going to have to do when we launch Case Blue is pick maybe a movement or maybe a Panzer Army chits as our first two markers, because what we need to do is we really need to make use of this gap and just get guys through here and around and moved forward. The Soviets are going to get some reinforcements at the beginning of the turn, so Stalingrad will be garrisoned, but this is a grand opportunity, and we just need to get the Axis to fix up the situation over near Army Group Center. So there we go. Attrition segment's over. Victory check segment. We are at, again, 32 victory points from our starting point at 31, I believe. Yes, 32 victory points. That is it for turn 12, the beginning of the Fall Blau scenario. When we come back in the next video, we'll be looking at July 1942 and the official start of Case Blue, Fall Blau. We'll see what happens. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate you sticking with me. I knew it took a while to get to the recording. We'll catch you in the next one. Until then, keep on gaming. Have fun. Take care.